Okay, so now let's ask three big questions about the cumulative part, okay? So, first of all, we're gonna ask, is there empirical support for that growth, right? We ought to be able, like, you know, fine, you've got a theoretical chart. You can visualize how that could be empirically supported. What does the evidence say? The second thing that we've glossed over completely is who are the advantaged and who are the disadvantaged, right? We've kind of made some big, both practical and for research. And I want to talk a little bit about what I've been learning and thinking about why it's so hard to answer those questions, because it's hard to answer those questions. So in terms of empirical support, some evidence appears to support cumulative disadvantage, and other evidence appears to refute it. There's no question whatsoever about disparities and inequities across the life course. That is not subject to question. The question is whether that gap increases, decreases, or stays the same. And there's work suggesting each of them. So the people who feel like the gap decreases are people who talk about age as a leveler, right? I don't know if some people have heard that expression. And there are certainly studies that show that the disparities, the inequities between, let's for a minute just say black and white, because data's collected that way, notwithstanding the social construction of those concepts, and that no biology corresponds to it or anything, but we've got data that way. And some people even say that they have data that show that those survival lines even cross. So that, in other words, at some point, the functional capacity of white Caucasian people decreases and of African American relatively increases. And people describe the reason for that is eventually biology catches up. This is a particularly favorite phrase of mine, that biology is realer than everything else. Everything else is laid on top of the biology, and eventually the biology just rears up and proves its might. But those studies have a gigantic methodological problem, which is this idea of differential mortality, which is, we're getting kind of technical here, but if one group of people dies younger than the other group of people, then a disproportionate number of the group that dies younger is gonna die younger. And so that means that the remaining members of that group are the particularly strong and hardy ones. And so differential mortality, which is very difficult to control for fully and completely, can completely turn your results upside down. Do you sort of see that? I need to make a picture of it, but I haven't. So that's the idea that, in fact, not only does the gap not increase, but it actually goes away, I believe is a methodological mistake. I do not believe that there is good data that supports that. But then you have the more kind of plausible and, sensible hypothesis that there's no interaction between age and disparity, and that in fact what happens across the life course is that they stay the same. And people who produce data that support that are people who are measuring discrete exposures. So they're things like smoking, exposure to polluted air, exposure to mold, discrete exposures, the things that epidemiologists study, where you can say this is an exposed group and this is an unexposed group. And discrete exposures appear, it's not that every exposure has the same effect across every age, but the effect of exposures across ages doesn't vary, okay? And so when you're looking at discrete exposures, it looks like those lines just run parallel, okay? So maybe, that is maybe what it is. But disadvantage is this multi-dimensional construct that is not a matter of additive discrete exposures. And what we have a problem with in the kind of health and public health, and when social work follows along behind to their detriment fields, is that we ignore what the social sciences understand about the pervasive effects of power relationships in society, the pervasive effects of economic inequality that go beyond specific discrete exposures. We know absolutely, data absolutely clear, that it is more bad to live as a person who is poor in a poor neighborhood than it is to live as a person who is poor in an economically diverse neighborhood. But we don't really know why. It's very hard to count all the things about a poor neighborhood. You know, people try to quantify them and end up doing kind of dumb stuff like counting mailboxes and trees. Trees are better to count than mailboxes, but it's still awfully hard to really make the case for the trees and the increase in life expectancy, but it's really there. And this, when you put this kind of evidence in, there's strong evidence that disadvantage grows across the life course. And we see that expressed biologically in dramatic differences in life expectancy. Even differences in life expectancy at age 65. So it's not just differences in what's going to happen earlier in life, but also later. So the mixed factors of class, of education early in life, of wealth, of inherited wealth, of money, different from wealth, housing, culture, immigration status, lead to cumulative disadvantage. So why is this not sort of like, everybody knows this, seems like kind of a big deal. It's really complicated methodologically, and this is part of my big point here, is I believe that we people who study aging have a really important contribution that we need to make to the conversation that we as academics need to be having. Because this conversation about the differences between the advantaged and the disadvantaged and what causes them and how to intervene in them and what are the causes of life and so forth can't be demonstrated without knowing some of the stuff that we know and nobody else seems to know about cohort effects and selective mortality and all this really nerdy methodological stuff that we think about and nobody else thinks about, and it messes up their results all the time. They never see on their charts what I think is there to be seen. So in order to see if this is true, you have to have very long-term longitudinal data. Cross-sectional data just doesn't do it, no matter how much of it there is. It still just doesn't do it. And furthermore, people have to understand the profundity of the cohort effect, of the fact that the future, the trajectory, the shape of the life of people that are born in 1945 is different from people who were born in 1955, is different from people who were born in 1965. And furthermore, in terms of this inequality stuff, it's getting worse with each cohort. It's not getting better, it's getting worse. And so what that means is that you don't see it out there in the tail, because those are the people from when it was better. And so it flattens, it shrinks the difference between the best and the worst, because the cohort effect is going the other. You know, we talk about all the time the cohort effect. We're getting cognitively better, we're getting smarter, we're getting better educated, all these things, and those things are not true. But the inequalities are also growing. So those things that are true are being driven by a portion of the population that is pulling the measurement of the other portion of the population. Then there's that selective mortality problem that doesn't get controlled for when you're a sociologist. And then there's the fact that you're nowhere if you're not doing multi-level modeling, which, be honest, not very many people can do. Multi-level modeling is really complicated and really hard, and we don't have interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary teams enough to do it. And, you know, the people who understand what needs to be done and the people who can do it are different people. So we've got a gap between the theoretical frameworks, the methodological frameworks, and the technical capacity. And I think that that is really impeding our knowledge about this. And so, you know what, I'm gonna stop there because I don't, you know, I have 2 more questions, and I have just as much stuff I've been thinking about the 2 more questions, but you could invite me back if you wanted to hear more about the who's advantaged and who's disadvantaged is way more complicated than at first blush, and the implications for both academic work and practice are profound. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ruth, for sharing your latest thoughts on cumulative disadvantage. I mean, it's a beast of a concept to really get your hands around. And clearly the implications, you know, it raises a boatload of questions. And so Ruth and I have been able to share at least 3 questions before this talk, but I'm only going to ask one. given the time frame, and open it up for questions for you all. So if you have questions, we do have Louise, who's walking around with a microphone, and you're so welcome to get her attention and ask a question. But I think I'll take the first question, if you don't mind. This graph has huge implications, and so I really want to talk about policymakers and the way that many interpret this graph. We just completed a study of low-income women with chronic health conditions in Title V of the Older Americans Act. This is the only federal policy for older adults who are looking for work. This is the only one out there. And so many of them were really talking about it was beyond employment. Once they got employment, their mental health improved. They got housing. It was this spiral effect that was really improving. And to me, it really pointed out to this tail end that there's plasticity there when increasing the institutional capacity, especially with federal policies. But policymakers, when we're speaking to them, often hear funding as dichotomous. I'm either going to give money to older adults in this limited resources and take away from children, or give it to children and take away from older adults. And so when you're doing policy work, how do you emphasize the win-win here, especially among inequity and issues of disadvantage?
This is actually a framework that takes away that dichotomy, because it is investment from the beginning of life that makes the end of life better. It is not, however, only investment at the very beginning of life. It's investment across the life course. So to help policymakers to understand that it's just like the Russian doll thing. It's the same people. So the people in whom we've disinvested in their early childhood and then who we've incarcerated across the bulk of their adulthood are the very same people who then are in our hospitals with nowhere to be discharged and multiple chronic conditions and disabilities. And we made it so with the policies that we made. So that's one thing. And then the second thing is, of course, we haven't even touched on the intergenerationality of this. So if you're living on cruising life down the green line, your kids are more likely to be also. And so an investment in adults, frankly, particularly women, is in fact an intergenerational investment. So there's no either or about it.
Okay, great.
Where do those kids come from?
Right. Terrific. I love the intergenerational solution with policies, especially when you were talking about what's productive and non-productive. Volunteering, older adults as tutors, older adults in schools, especially helping vulnerable populations. Terrific win-win. Love the idea. So, yes. Oh, hold on. Oh, we have a question over here. Sorry. Yes.
Thank you very much, Ruth. I'm an NYU alum, and my grandmother lived till she was 104. With that being said, she was actually one of the disadvantaged adults because she did not have an education. She was an immigrant. She didn't speak English very well, but she took it upon herself to eat well, to walk every day like the lady in your video. So can people who are living in disadvantaged areas, can they actually change their habits to improve their lifespan, or is my grandmother an anomaly?
Yes and yes and yes. So, of course, everybody can change their habits. People's habits are not the only thing that cause people who are disadvantaged to have disadvantaged life courses. It is a great misunderstanding, not of yours, but of ours, that all of the effects of disadvantage are manifest at the level of individual behavior. Now, obviously, individual behaviors make a difference. Also, obviously, these are all ranges, and they're sort of population medians, and we're not even expressing the size of the variance. And most probably, the variance is huge. And so that's why your grandmother lived to be 104, and my grandmother died at 72, and she actually took reasonably good care of herself too. So that I think that we have to remember that as we start to study this stuff seriously, we're at the very, very beginnings of describing what these population distributions look like. And they certainly, they're going to overlap with each other profoundly. Yes, Mary.
So Mary, you want to as well? I had two questions, but she asked one of them, so I'm going to ask the other one. What about ageism? What about the fact that the older you get, the less valued you are, and perhaps the less you value yourself, and the number of ways in which you are not fully able to contribute to society in a new historical moment when, as you point out, so many people are getting older, and yet the old roles that we had defined for older adults have disappeared.
Right. Thank you for asking that. So that comes in the answer to question 2, where we talk about a lot of isms and the effects that they have on people. So in fact, it doesn't really look like race is a differentiator. It looks like racism is a differentiator. It doesn't, it doesn't really look like it's acculturation that's a differentiator. It's, misogyny against immigrants, that is. And so similarly, ageism, there is clear evidence that the more negatively you feel about age, the greater, Becca Levy's work shows us that you die 7 years younger if you are really negative about how you feel about aging. And even sort of more profoundly, when you expose people to sort of negative stereotypes about aging and then give them cognitive tasks to do, they do less well on them because they feel like old people can't do that. And so the first victims of ageism are ourselves in exactly the same way that the first victims of other kinds of oppression based on identity are the people who hold those identities. And again, every woman who was good at science until she got to middle school knows that.
Do we have another question?
This is a question about policy and public support. So I am the co-founder of an organization called Stage 2 Startups. It's actually focused on helping people who have experience become entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
And that's something that actually is very rare in America. Actually, it's rare worldwide because it's not, a friend of mine who is a journalist actually recently came out with a report that said more and more New Yorkers are becoming entrepreneurs as they get older. But there's actually no government policy that is focusing on helping older people become entrepreneurs. And actually, by becoming entrepreneurs, the research, I've talked to a person who studied this, the research says that if you become older and you're working creatively, you actually live longer, you're happier. If you're an entrepreneur and you're doing exactly the same work as someone who's actually a worker, you're actually happier as the entrepreneur. So I'm curious about your thoughts on public policy. Should the government not only help young people and people in low-income communities become entrepreneurs, should they help all of us, all middle-class people become entrepreneurs?
Well, this is a topic I actually know something about, unlike what I've just been talking about. I studied this for a long time. And I think there are two sides to that coin. Obviously, the answer is yes, the government should help us all become entrepreneurs. And it's important that we recognize that people with experience are good entrepreneurs and successful entrepreneurs and creative entrepreneurs, and it's ridiculous that, the policy of not this incubator, but other incubators, there really are incubators that are for, just people under 30, and there's all sorts of barriers. However, here's the big semicolon. Having said that, there are an awful lot of experienced entrepreneurs that were unemployed before they were experienced entrepreneurs. And they were unemployed because of ageism and age discrimination, and they couldn't get another job because nobody would have hired them. And I believe that the government also has a responsibility to be sure that that is not just illegal, but that the illegality of that is enforced. Because I believe that some of the sort of neoliberal myth of the renaissance of entrepreneurship corresponds to the death of quality jobs and the ability of people to keep them for as long as they need them and want them. And we need both.
Thank you.
We have one more question.
So it's a very interesting talk, lots of great ideas, but you kind of left a cliffhanger, at least for me. So I would like maybe a little bit more. So you said something in the beginning about that line. So, and you see some better way about all of that. Can you talk a little bit about that?
That cross line, I thought you were the other cross. Yeah, I think it's this stuff that we're talking about. I think that there's a really, really critical, a piece that we didn't talk about is access to education across the life course and the centrality and criticalness of that. And there's actually a good slide about that up here, I think. Which this is adapted from my friend Alex Kalash. But it's kind of like if we're going to live for 90 years, what are the chances that one dose of education until we're 25 is going to be sufficient for us across the next, however, 70 years? It doesn't make any sense. 65, it still doesn't make any sense. But we don't have a kind of meaningful educational system that's built like that. And I think we have to invest in building it, invest in adapting these educational systems that are pretty good to have sort of meaningful access to people across their life courses. And I think that's another example of what is harder for entrepreneurs to get, that is accessible potentially to them in the workplace. That's another locus of training and education. And we have to remember that if we're gonna take the concept of jobs away and replace them with the concept of entrepreneurship, then we have to replace the theoretical benefits of jobs also. And that means access to education and continued skills development and learning and so on. And so I think that's a serious and critical piece. Another serious and critical piece is work. I believe that while volunteerism and all kinds of contribution are incredibly meaningful and productive and so on, that work is one of those things that has multifaceted, has more dimensions of benefit than we understand, in exactly the same way that poor neighborhoods have more dimensions of harm than we understand. And that what happens when people continue to work is positive in so many different dimensions, individually, in a familial context, in a community context, macroeconomically, globally, economically. It's actually, you know, the World Bank modeled the difference between this increase in older people being a disaster and being just fine economically as another year or two of work and a few percentage points increase in women's working from the beginning of work life on. So the future of the human race boils down to childcare, is what I learned from that World Bank work. But it's really, I mean, I keep bringing this back to women because it's actually, there's so much about the lives of women across the life course that could change everything. So I will also say a continued and much deeper and much more widespread investment in the education and the equality and the control of their bodies of women around the world is another piece that I think changes, whether that's devastating or great.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. I think we could wrap it up. And so please join me in thanking Dr.